Hey, I'm Brad. As a new gardener, I'm told that more people kill their plants by overwatering than any other reason. You can buy self-watering containers like the Earthbox at your local garden store or online. They're $30 to $40 a piece, and I understand they work pretty well. Most of the self-watering containers that you see that are built out of 5-gallon buckets actually require 2 5-gallon buckets. Since construction has slowed down, these 5-gallon buckets are a little harder to find, and I just didn't have very many of them laying around. But what I did have was a few buckets. I had some soda cans, some water bottles, and a little bit of hardware cloth. So I decided to see if I could build a self-watering container with those items. What I did was, first I took a 5-gallon bucket and did a really good job cleaning the inside of the bucket. The next thing I did was, I decided that instead of using 2 buckets, since I had these soda cans, that I was going to use them in the bottom of the container. You'll see why in just a minute. I took the soda cans, and to make sure that they'd fill with water, I simply took a sheetrock knife and I cut a little pie-shaped opening in the top and the bottom side of the can. Kind of looks like this. Then I took the cans and I stacked them down in the bottom of the 5-gallon bucket. Then I took my water bottle. I took a 3/16" drill bit and I drilled a number of holes in the water bottle all the way around to make it very porous. Then I simply took my knife and cut off the very bottom of the water bottle. This makes the bottle a little bit taller than the soda cans. Then I put the water bottle down in the bucket. It takes about 11 soda cans and 1 water bottle to make a self-watering container. After filling the bucket with my soda cans and my water bottle, I then took a piece of hardware cloth and cut it about the size of the bucket. What I found when cutting this hardware cloth was my normal 10 snips did a really poor job. These shears did a good job of cutting the hardware cloth. I took my square piece of hardware cloth and trimmed off the ends. I then cut a little slot here for the water bottle to fit through. On the back side, I just folded the corners up so that it would fit into the bucket. The next step is to just take the hardware cloth and shove it down into the bucket around your water bottle, resting on top of the soda cans. This hardware cloth forms a shelf that your soil mix can sit on. It keeps the soil and the water separate. For just a little extra safety, I'm taking a single sheet of newspaper and laying it down in the bottom of my bucket on top of the hardware cloth. The roots will be free to grow through this newspaper, but that'll keep my soil mix from dropping down into the water initially. My cans are 5 inches tall, so what I did was I measured up 4.5 inches, and that was the center of the hole that I cut. I cut a 1-inch hole. What that does is that gives you a 1-inch air gap between your soil and the water. It prevents root rot. Initially I tried using a paddle bit to drill my hole, and it really chattered and kind of made a mess out of the 5-gallon bucket. I found that if you'll use one of these hole saw bits in your drill, that it'll do a much better job of cutting your hole. When you're ready to water it, you can simply water through the side with a hose. Finally, you may wish to paint your container. It makes the container look a lot better sitting in your yard, and it also prevents sunlight from passing through the bucket and light pruning the roots of your plants. For my soil mix, I'm going to start with 5 gallons of the Jungle Growth flower and vegetable mix. I'm going to add about 2 gallons of peat moss. To that I'm going to add a couple of tablespoons of lime. And finally, a couple gallons of composted cow manure. I've added some water to my soil mix and have made sure to mix it up thoroughly. I want the soil moistened to where if I get a handful of it and squeeze it, I only get about 1 or 2 drops of water out of the soil. But it's really important to make sure that it is moistened, especially when you add the dry peat moss, because that peat moss will tend to stay dry for a long time. When you fill your buckets with your soil mix, make sure that the water bottle gets filled really, really well. You have to have good contact with this soil and the water. If not, the container is not going to wick the moisture up as you need it to. Once your plant is in, add about 3/4 of a cup of general purpose fertilizer. This should be something between a 5-5-5 and a 15-15-15. All three numbers should be the same, and make sure that it's a general purpose fertilizer, not a water soluble fertilizer. Finally, you're going to want to cover the whole thing with plastic. To make the plastic stick, I'm going to run a little bead of clear silicone sealer around the top of my bucket. I'll be able to put the plastic into that, and then once the silicone dries, I can just trim the excess off with a razor blade. And I'll just trim this plastic off to make the whole thing look neat. And there we have it.